It was a cold and dark night. Carlos, the night guard of Santa Clara State School, was starting another night of work. He was already used to the silence of the empty school, but he always felt a chill down his spine as he walked through the dark corridors. Carlos was doing his usual rounds. He checked the classrooms, the labs, and the courtyard. Everything seemed normal until he reached the second-floor corridor. There, he heard a strange sound, like hurried footsteps. He stopped and looked around, but saw nothing. It must just be my imagination, he thought. He continued his rounds, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. In one of the corridors, he found one of the classroom doors slightly ajar. Strange. I'm sure I closed all the doors, he murmured to himself. Carlos decided to enter the room to check. As he opened the door, he was greeted by a cold wind that seemed to come from nowhere. The students' notebooks were scattered on the floor, as if someone had rushed through there. He turned on his flashlight and began to search the room. It was then that he heard a whisper. It seemed to come from the back of the room. "Who's there?" he asked, trying to stay calm. But no one responded. He slowly approached, and that's when he saw it. A pale figure with long, messy hair was facing away from him in the corner of the room. Carlos felt his heart race. "Hey, you shouldn't be here," he exclaimed, trying to sound authoritative. But the figure didn't move. Suddenly, it slowly turned its head, revealing a face with no eyes, just empty sockets that seemed to suck in all the light around it. Carlos took a step back, fear taking over. He tried to run, but his feet felt glued to the floor. The figure began to move towards him, floating a few inches above the ground. "Get out of here!" Carlos shouted, but his voice sounded weak and distant. Finally, he managed to move and ran out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Without looking back, he ran down the stairs and went straight to the security room, where he locked the door and leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath. He looked at the security cameras, hoping to see something, but all the monitors only showed empty corridors. "Am I going crazy?" he thought. But the strange sounds and the feeling of being watched continued. Carlos decided to call the school director. With trembling hands, he dialed the number. "Director, something very strange is happening here. I think there's someone in the school," he said, trying not to sound desperate. "Calm down, Carlos. I'll call the police and send someone over," the director replied, clearly concerned. While he waited, Carlos decided to review the footage from the cameras. He rewound the tape to the moment when he was on the second floor. That's when he saw something that made his blood run cold. The pale figure was standing in the corridor, looking directly at the camera, before disappearing into a cloud of shadows. The police arrived a few minutes later but found nothing but the overturned classrooms. Carlos tried to explain what he saw, but the officers were skeptical. "Maybe it's just the stress of the night shift," one of them suggested. Carlos knew he wasn't crazy. Something was in that school, and he felt like it wasn't over. While the police searched the premises, he looked at the door to the security room and saw, for a brief moment, the dark sockets staring back at him again. After that night, Carlos could no longer forget what he had seen. He decided that he needed to understand what was happening at Santa Clara State School, even if that meant confronting his worst fears. The next night, Carlos returned to work, this time armed with a recorder and a camera. He started his rounds earlier, determined to capture any evidence of what he had witnessed. As the night went on, the tension grew. Every sound, every shadow seemed to amplify his fear. He began in the second-floor corridor, where he had seen the pale figure. With the camera in hand, he filmed every inch, speaking softly into the recorder. "It's 2 a.m. I'm in the corridor where I saw the apparition last night. I'm going to investigate the classroom." Upon entering the classroom, Carlos felt the cold wind again. He turned on the flashlight and began to explore. The students' notebooks were still scattered on the floor, exactly as he had left them. Suddenly, he heard the whisper again, this time louder. "Are you there?" he asked, trying to sound brave. The response came in the form of a quick movement in the darkness. The pale figure appeared in the corner of the room, floating as before. Carlos tried to capture the image with his camera, but the figure moved with supernatural speed, disappearing before he could react. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice trembling. There was no answer, just the oppressive silence of the room. Desperate, he decided to leave and search elsewhere. As he closed the door, he heard a noise behind him. Turning quickly, he saw a message written in shaky letters on the blackboard. "Leave." Carlos knew he needed more information. The next day, he went to the city library and began researching the history of the school. He discovered that decades ago, a young student named Helena had mysteriously disappeared. Her last appearance had been recorded at the school, and no one ever found out what happened to her. Intrigued, Carlos decided to speak with former staff members of the school. It was then that he met Dona Marlene, an elderly woman who had worked as a janitor for over 30 years. "Ah, Helena," Marlene said, with sadness in her eyes. "She was a sweet girl, but something troubled her. They said she was interested in the occult, and then she vanished." With this new information, Carlos returned to the school that night, determined to find more answers. He brought with him a book of protective rituals he had found at the library. He believed that if Helena was trapped between this world and the next, maybe he could help her find peace. At midnight, he began the ritual in the second-floor corridor. He lit candles, spread salt on the floor, and started reciting the words from the book. The atmosphere around him became heavy, and the air seemed to vibrate with an invisible energy. It was then that Helena appeared, clearer than ever. She floated in the middle of the salt circle, her empty eyes fixed on Carlos. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice filled with tension. Helena didn't speak, but her expression seemed to soften. Carlos felt an intense cold, as if he were being wrapped in ice. He closed his eyes, trying to concentrate on the ritual. Suddenly, he saw images in his mind. Helena being drawn into a dark closet, a crushing sense of fear, and then nothing. "She's trapped here," Carlos murmured. "We need to help her find the light." Before he could do anything, the lights in the school began to flicker. The temperature dropped even further. Helena began to dissipate, her form becoming increasingly transparent. Carlos knew he had to act quickly. With his heart pounding, he continued the ritual, reciting the final words. "Helena, find peace and go into the light," he said. The moment he finished, Helena disappeared completely. The lights stopped flickering, and the temperature returned to normal. Carlos felt exhausted but relieved. He thought he might have helped her. However, as he was preparing to leave, he heard one final whisper. "It's not over yet." Carlos turned quickly, trying to locate the source of the whisper, but everything was silent again. He looked around suspiciously and decided it was time to leave. His head was filled with unanswered questions, but he knew he needed rest to process everything that had happened. The next day, Carlos went to the school earlier to speak with the principal about the events of the previous night. He explained everything, from the strange sounds to Helena's apparition. The principal, visibly worried, decided that it would be best to call in a paranormal expert. In the afternoon, the school received a visit from Dona Teresa, a medium known in town for her abilities. She listened attentively to Carlos' account and decided that she would need to conduct a séance at the school to try to communicate with Helena. At night, Carlos, the principal, and Dona Teresa gathered in the security room. The medium prepared the environment with candles, incense, and a Ouija board. They sat around the table, holding hands, as Dona Teresa invoked the spirits. "Helena, we're here to help you. If you're present, please give us a sign," Dona Teresa called. The board began to move slowly, forming the words, "Help me." Carlos felt a chill run down his spine. "What happened to you, Helena?" he asked. The pointer on the board moved again, spelling out, "Lost, darkness, fear." Dona Teresa closed her eyes, concentrating deeply. "Helena, we're here to guide you to the light. Follow my voice, leave the fear behind, and find peace." The atmosphere grew heavy, as if the air was charged with electricity. Suddenly, a strong wind blew through the room, extinguishing all the candles. In the silence that followed, they heard a soft sigh, almost of relief. The lights came back on, and Carlos felt a strange sense of calm. "I think we did it," he said, breathing deeply. Dona Teresa smiled faintly. Helena found peace. She's no longer trapped here. Carlos thanked the medium and the principal for their help. He felt that the school was finally free from the unsettling presence of Helena. However, as he gathered his things, he found a note on the floor of the security room. Written in shaky letters, the message read, "The darkness hasn't gone. It has only changed form." Carlos felt a chill in his spine again. He knew that, although Helena might have found peace, something darker was still lurking in the halls of Santa Clara State School. Thank you for watching another Dark Tales video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any scary stories. See you next time, and beware of the dark.